UFC judges are getting a little bit too comfortable in making bad decisions, and last Saturday at UFC 307, we consistently saw suspect judging in almost all of the fights that went to decision, which led me to ask the question, how can judges be held accountable in UFC and MMA matches? Let's take a look at the decision in the co-main event at UFC 307. Raquel Pennington, the champion, versus Juliana Pena, the challenger. The judges had it as a split decision win, 48-47 for Juliana Pena. However, the commentators were convinced it was 2-2 going into the 5th round. Pennington had 2 rounds and Pena had 2 rounds, and whoever won the 5th would have won the fight. Raquel Pennington clearly won the 5th round, which would have made it 48-47 Pennington. Now, the commentators are known to have bias and they have their own job. We shouldn't rely on them to keep track of the scores. However, they are right there, so they do have a good idea most of the time. So let's take a look at the 26 members of the press that scored the fight, and they have been working in combat sports and covering it for years. They should have a pretty good idea of what's going on, right? Every single media member did not score the fight for Juliana Pena, which is who the judges scored it for. Only one of them scored it as a draw, and the other 25 of them scored the fight 48-47 for Pennington, which is what I also personally had the fight as. But that wasn't the only weird scorecards on this card. Let's look at the featured prelim, Buckley versus Thompson. Before Buckley found a vicious KO in the 3rd round, here are the scorecards of all 3 judges for the first 2 rounds. As you can see, one judge had it 1-1 after 2 rounds, the other had it 2-up for Buckley, and the third had it 2-up for Wonderboy. There's a couple things we should think about before we start piling onto the judges before making robbery decisions. And number 1 is that all judges sit at different points in the octagon, meaning that they see, hear, and they judge things differently. So it makes sense that not every judge is going to agree on a score. Number 2, most called robbery decisions are actually close fights that could have gone either way. They're just over-exaggerated by social media or fans of either fighter, making the objective truth almost impossible to come by. But why do we see this happening so much in MMA and not in other sports? Well, in other sports, players, fans, and officials, they all know the rules, and they usually know them by heart. Take soccer or football, for example. Offside is offside, a goal is a goal, and a penalty kick is a penalty kick. It's as simple as that. However, in MMA, what is a damaging strike? Like, ask yourself, what is a damaging strike? What do you consider a strike that does damage? And what level of damage does it do? Because not every strike is the same. How much do you think a calf kick hurts? And for someone who's watching a fight and who hasn't trained in MMA, we don't actually know how much a calf kick hurts or debilitates a fighter. So we have an idea of what we're thinking does damage, but we've never been punched in the face or we've never been calf kicked before. So who are we to say how much a strike damages a fighter? And how many points is a takedown worth? Is a takedown worth 1 damaging strike? Is it worth 2 or 3? Like, what's the exact number here that lines up? How are the judges scoring how much a takedown is worth and how much a strike is worth? I guarantee you that every single person watching this video has a slightly different answer. And that answer seems to me like it's also different for some judges, which is the bigger problem. Because our opinions realistically don't matter. We can think whatever we think about our favorite fighters and our favorite fights. Whoever won Johnny Hendricks versus GSP, whoever won Dominic Reyes versus John Jones. Everyone can have their own opinions on those fights. That's fine. But when you have judges who are affecting the livelihoods of fighters by giving them a loss or a win, I have a problem with that. I think the judging issue that's been prominent in boxing for so long and is becoming more prominent in UFC is due to 2 things. UFC is growing, and as the sport grows, new fans by nature don't know the rules and how to score fights. And because everyone can have an opinion, this leads to lots of people having an uninformed opinion. And even if you have experienced hardcore fans, I bet you that 90% of them have never taken the time to learn how MMA is actually scored or read a rule book of how to judge. Even the professional fighters don't know most of the time, which is crazy to think about. What other sport do you have the top professional athletes in that sport not knowing how a round or how a damaging strike is scored? That seems like a problem. The second reason is that MMA and combat sports are largely subjective, meaning that what you and I count as damage might not mean as much to someone who's watching the fight cage side, like the judges or the commentators, or what you and I count effective ground and pound might not be as effective in the judge's eyes, because that's their bias. And we also have to take into account other things, like how does the fighter get up after the round finishes or after the fight finishes? Are they raising their hands in the air, acting like they won? Do the judges actually take those things into consideration or not? And the whole notion of you have to beat a champion to be a champion. If you go toe-to-toe with a champion and you don't really prove it that you can go out there and beat them, let's say Sean Strickland versus Dricus du Plessis. That's one of the ones that comes to mind for me as one of the closest title fights that we've seen in the last year. That was an incredibly close fight. And if you believe in this idea of you have to beat the champion handedly, then Sean Strickland would still be champion. So I don't think that comes into account either when judges are scoring. Or does it? I don't know. It's really difficult to know, and I feel like this is the problem, is that fans like me and you and people watching pay-per-views for the first time or for the 10th time, we don't really know the rules of MMA or how to judge things. So then it leads us to get upset online, like a lot of the controversy surrounding Jose Aldo versus Mario Batista at UFC 307. Honestly, I don't have any idea of how to fix this. Do we have a rule book where it says 3 damaging head strikes equals 1 takedown with no advancing in position? And how much does advancing a position count towards getting a submission? And we haven't even gotten to things like submissions. How much does a submission attempt count compared to wobbling an opponent? Are those things equal in your mind? Are they equal in the judges' minds? We don't know. I don't know. I haven't seen any resources that specifically say 1 punch equals this on the ground. So it's really just confusing, and I feel like this needs to be addressed sooner rather than later, because as this sport of MMA grows and more people gravitate towards it, it's going to be hard for it to reach the same levels as a football or a basketball if people don't even know what they're watching. So if you guys liked this video and you guys liked kind of a new concept, an explainer concept, or kind of just a rant concept, let me know in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.